Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, my apologies this week, we are a day late. I am, as I've said before, a teacher, and it is the summer at the moment. So, although the last couple of summers I've been on foreign holidays and had to miss a week, this year it's looking like we're not going to miss a week. But being down in Cornwall with my friend and family and girlfriend, etc., means that there may be the odd kind of little hiccup here or there. Getting it a day late I don't think is the end of the world. Now, I'm not sure if there's going to be any interviews on this week as well. I might be able to chuck one on later, but as it stands there aren't any at the moment. I'm going to try my best to get them sorted for you for next week, but again, it's been difficult to organise things, being out of my usual routine and having social plans and such. But we are back, and today we're going to be having a quick look at the reaction to the rotation news from the rest of the community. We're then going to go and have a look at how some of the decks have been affected by this rotation news, and then we're going to finish off by looking at what I'm going to kind of call a freeway love triangle within Pokemon cards at the moment, but it's not really a love, but it is very much a kind of rock, paper, scissors triangle. So we're going to look at this a little bit more as we go through. But starting off then, the reaction to the rotation news. Now, the very first thing that people said with the rotation, and this is something that I brought up last week, was Landorus. Everybody's been saying how Landorus, with things like Fighting Stadium and Strong Energy and stuff like that, is going to become ridiculously good. I believe you can put a Strong Energy and a Fighting Stadium and a Muscle Band in play, and against an EX, because Fighting Stadium only works against EXs, I believe, that you're going to be doing 90 damage on turn 1, or against a non-EX, 70 damage on turn 1, plus 30 to the bench, which is kind of a little bit ridiculous. Being able to hit for that much damage on the first turn of the game is obviously fantastic. But there's a couple of things about Landorus which people are missing. First of all, it is weak to water. And this is very important, because it lends itself some very easy counters, in the same way that Raichu becomes a very nice, easy, splashable counter for something like Yveltal. There are some nice counters for this. First of all, we've got Seismitoad EX, which is a card which I believe I'm going to end up talking a lot more about as we go through the weeks as Rising Fist is released and we start getting some tournaments. Seismitoad, for a single double colourless energy, as I've told you before, does 30 damage and locks trainers, which is of course 60 damage on a Landorus. You put a Muscle Band on then, and that's 50 damage, or 100 on a Landorus. Add a Laser Verbank, and you're doing 100 damage, plus 30 for poison, which goes to 160 at the end of his turn if he can't get out the active, and he's got a retreat cost of 3, which is a big downside of Landorus, which means at the end of my turn, he's going to die from poison, whether I do anything or not. That's a very easy KO. Not only that, but if let's take, for instance, Kyurem, the non-EX Kyurem, the Outrage Kyurem that was originally printed back in Noble Victories and will remain post-rotation in the format due to the reprint in Legendary Treasures. That, if Landorus just hits you for 30, you're going to be doing 50, which doubles to 100 back. With a Strong Energy, then he's going to be hitting you for 50, which means you hit him for 70 back, which is of course double to 140, because you're doing the ×2 for the water weakness, and you essentially do 20 more damage than is on you. With a Strong Energy and a Muscle Band, then they're doing 70 to you, and you're doing 90 back, which doubles to 180 and gets the one-hit KO. Now, obviously, the non-EX Kyurem can be played around. They can escape rope to put the other Pokemon to the bench. Or, so you've got to bring something else out, although you can get around that by putting out 2 Legendary Treasures Kyurem. Or they can, for instance, use Lysandra, or hope to hit a heads on a Pokemon catcher. Or even use something like Genesect and Red Signal, although that's going to be very awkward to pull off in a fighting deck, but it's a possibility. Or maybe they're going to use something like Ninetales, because if you're using a Landorus-focused deck, and you're going to have a lot of space, and that means that you're going to be able to play stuff like a Ninetales as well. The point I'm making is there's a lot of good counters. Plasma Kyurem is going to be doing 30 damage, get 4 Deoxys and a Muscle Band out, that's 90 damage, doubles to 180 for just a Water and a Colress Machine. It's 2 energy, but Colress Machine allows you to put that second energy on in 1 turn. So, when this rotation was announced, people immediately went, oh my god, Landorus. And yes, Landorus is going to be a beast, there's no denying that. Any Pokemon that can do 70 or 2 in EX 90 on the first turn of the game for a single energy is inevitably going to be good. And heck, if you want to start adding Laser in, you can be doing 100 to anything. Because essentially the Fighting Stadium only adds a 20 damage to EXs, so you take the Stadium out, you max out at 70 with a Strong Energy and the Muscle Band, but then you add a Verbank Laser, and you're going up to 100 there. Now, with the Stadium in play, you could do 90 plus 10 for the Laser, goes up to 100 to an EX, or 70 plus 10 for the Laser, goes up to 80 for a non-EX. With Laser Verbank, essentially what I'm saying is the Laser adds 20 with the Verbank regardless of EX or not. So actually, maybe you're better off taking away the Fighting Stadium, putting a Laser Verbank in, and you need a few things. You know, you need the Laser, the Verbank, the Strong Energy, and the Muscle Band on turn 1, and that's a lot to ask for, but that's 100 damage to everything on turn 1, and it's going to keep going round. So, something to think about. But there's a couple other things which I think people have missed from the rotation. So, Landorus was the big thing. Everyone's trying to trade for it and buy it at the moment. One of the things I'll say about Landorus is it's very easily countered. Having said that, Darkrai was kind of easily countered by things like Landorus, Stunfisk and Terrakion, and that became popular. Yveltal was very easily countered by things like Thundurus and Raichu, and that became popular. So maybe it could work here. The other thing, there's a couple other things. One of the things I want to point out about Landorus is every part of that kind of amazing combo is easily countered. Fighting Stadium, put down another Stadium. Muscle Band, play a Startling Megaphone. Strong Energy, play an Enhanced Hammer, etc. And also, as I've said, Landorus has a big retreat cost, which makes it very vulnerable to Laser. I am not saying Landorus is not going to be good. What I am saying is, essentially I like to think that my listeners are slightly cleverer than the average Pokemon player listening to this. And I like to think I can help you with a few little bits of advice here and there. So what I'm going to say is, yeah, Landorus looks good, but be aware of the failings, the big retreat costs, the weakness to water. And the other thing you should be aware of, Stunfisk. Stunfisk is basically Landorus, but you only give up 1 prize. Now, something I do need to point out about Stunfisk is its significantly lower HP, which is a problem, especially when you take into effect that it's got the same weakness to water, and because it's got the same weakness to water, it's going to be vulnerable to the exact same counters that have been played for Landorus, except it's got 100 HP, not 180. So something like a Seismitoad Muscle Band for 100, or for 50 times 2 with a weakness, or something like a Kyurem Muscle Band for 100, is going to get the KO on that automatically, but it only gives up 1 prize. But thinking about Stunfisk, you can put the Strong Energy on. You can put the Muscle Band on. You can get the Fighting Stadium out. And it doesn't do 90 for 1 energy, it does 80 for 1 energy. And it doesn't do 30 to the bench, it does 20 to the bench. But actually, that's really not that bad when you think about it, because you're only losing 10 damage to the active, 10 to the bench, but you're not giving up an extra prize. Now, if people are playing water counters to Landorus, then those same water counters will also be effective against Stunfisk, and that could potentially present a problem. I'm not saying that it's not going to. What I am saying is be aware of this, because it's a more efficient Landorus. It's an easier Landorus. The other thing to think is Landorus non-EX. From the same set, he's got 120 HP, same weakness to water. Now again, for 1 fighting energy, you're doing a base of 20, which can go up to 80. There is no bench damage, but you can attach an energy to a card on your bench. Now, I think Landorus EX could potentially be better for his second attack here. Personally, I would be more comfortable leading with the fighting Landorus, the non-EX Landorus, they're all fighting. I'd potentially, and I haven't tested this out, so these are just kind of thoughts at the moment, sans testing, but at least theoretically, I'd be happier leading with the non-EX Landorus, doing, 60, 80 damage, whatever, to the active, whilst building up Landorus on the bench, and then you just put one strong energy on your bench Landorus, and he's doing 170. Or a strong energy in a muscle band, he's doing 190. And then you're one-hitting anything. Now, as a side note here, one ruling which everybody's been talking about with Landorus has been this ruling of what happens with strong energy. Now, for those that have forgotten, Landorus EX basically says that if you discard the fighting energy attached to Landorus, it goes from 80 to 150 damage, and strong energy adds 20 damage to the attack. So the question that I've seen a lot of people asking here is, if you discard the strong energy to do the extra 70 damage, does it still do the extra 20? Now, I don't believe we've had a proper ruling for this, and I don't think we will until the set is released, but after talking to some judges, they've confirmed what I thought was the case, and the answer is yes. So, essentially, you do the attack, and then the energy gets discarded. So if I've got strong energy on my Landorus, that adds 20 to put it up to 170, and then I discard the fighting energy. You'll still have to discard the strong energy, but it's doing the extra 20 damage before you do so. So, Landorus, water weakness, retreat cost, Stunfisk is more efficient, maybe lead with a non-EX, and just use the EX for the big attack, and don't forget the ruling strong energy, it looks like will do the extra damage before the discard. A lot of people have been talking about Landorus on the old interweb since the rotation announcement last week, so I thought this was something that was worth. There is no news. There has been no news to share with you guys this week. So in the absence of any real news, I thought it was worth spending 10 minutes at the beginning to look at Landorus. But I think the one card everyone has slept on since this rotation announcement is computer search. I can't believe people are not so ridiculously excited about computer search being kept in the format. And keeping with the kind of fighting theme, computer search allows you to search out a strong energy. And I believe it's Corinna, the new supporter, which helps the fighting Pokemon, that is going to allow you to search. I mean, for those of you that have forgotten about Corinna, it reads search your deck for one fighting Pokemon and one item card. That item card can be computer search, which allows you to search for a strong energy. I mean, Corinna, play 4 of them, and the chance of getting the turn 1 Landorus or Lucario or Landorus EX, etc. is huge, or Stunfisk even, because you can search for a switcher and escape rope, or if you've got everything you need but the strong energy, then fantastic. Search for a computer search, get the strong energy. So people have really been, I've seen everybody going, oh, Landorus, 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 the EX. What I haven't seen people going is, hang on a second, we've still got computer search, which remains the only card which allows us to search for a special energy. Two other things that have been pointed out since the rotation. First of all, I did make a mistake last week. I tried so hard. It seems like I only made one little mistake. The Espeon with the cool ability which blocks all effects of attacks except for damage, which I said the one from Dark Explorers, which was actually our Nationals promo in 2013, which I said was being rotated, is not being rotated. It was printed with alternate artwork in the Sylveon collection as a promo. So thank you to the people that pointed. I think there were 3 people that pointed out to me on Twitter. Thank you very much to those people. I do appreciate it, because now we know. The other thing, and this is the only card that people have really brought up to me that I missed, is not a card that I missed, but it is a card that I considered and decided not to talk about, and that was Foul Play Zoroark. A lot of people pointing out, not a lot, but a few people pointing out to me, that's the one that for a double colourless energy does the same attack back to the defending Pokemon. A lot of people pointing out to me that that isn't being rotated. Honestly, It's been reprinted a few times. I think there were 2 different promo versions of it. It kept coming back around, but honestly, it's not a card which I like. Now, I did actually play this myself in my 5th place ECC list this past year, but I didn't use it once. It was a nice card to kind of threaten a Black Kyurem EX, although no one would ever. Because essentially, for a DCE, you discarded a DCE and 1-hit KO a Black Kyurem EX. But ever since Druddigon got released, there was really no reason to play this. Nobody was playing it anymore. And although it did see a bit of play up until the release of Druddigon, since the release of Druddigon, it had seen no play whatsoever. And I didn't see anybody play. If it had kept, essentially, what I was looking at last when I was looking at the rotation was, if it was kept in the format, would anyone still play it? And with this Zoroark, especially with a fighting weakness and the fact that people had already stopped playing it, the answer that I came to was no. I really don't believe that anybody was going to be playing that. So, there we go. It was out of the format. What can you do? So, that's a little rotation announcement. After last week, I did have a look around all the websites, etc., all the discussion boards and the Facebook pages, and just to see what everyone was saying, but really, the vast majority of the chatter was about Landorus, so I thought it was worth looking at today. So one of the things I want to have a quick look at now is talking about some of the main decks and how they're going to change post-rotation. And I figured let's start off with what has, until US Nationals at least, been the top 3. And that is Yveltal decks, including Garbodor, but not just Garbodor, Virizion Genesect, and Plasma. And let's start off with the big boy, Yveltal Garbodor. Now, I finally got a deck breakdown of Yveltal Garbodor up on my YouTube channel this past week. This was the Belgian Nationals winning list that was posted on Pokémon.com. I would heartily recommend you all get yourself over to my YouTube channel and have a look at that, just to see how the deck works, etc. Now, looking at what this particular deck has lost, it's not lost much. But what it has lost is absolutely huge. This has 2 real key losses. And it is going to change. It's really going to change the way the deck plays. The first thing it's lost is Dark Patch. And I cannot overstate how important this was to Yveltal decks. Now, you'll notice, for instance, the Belgian national winning list, which I put up there, up on my YouTube channel, that didn't actually play Energy Switch. The deck can survive without Energy Switch, but that deck cut down to 3 Dark Patch, and Dark Patch is just a huge loss. If you've played against Yveltal decks, and honestly, ladies and gentlemen, if you've been playing this past year, you really should have played against quite a few Yveltal decks, you'll notice that there's many a turn where it's just attach Dark Patch, boom, make an X-Ball. Not X-Ball, sorry, Evil Ball. Or even Dark Patch, attach. And then they'll go ahead with a Y-Cyclone. Or DCE Dark Patch and go ahead for Y-Cyclone. There's been a lot of these kind of plays, and without Dark Patch you are really slowing the deck down. You are drastically slowing the deck down. And it's going to take a lot to recover from. It really is. But one thing which does need to be pointed out, it only takes 2 energy attachments to use Evil Ball. So it's not going to be that much of a big deal. Now, one of the things which is going to be really hit, now I know the list I posted from Belgian Nats doesn't include Darkrai, but a lot of people have enjoyed playing Darkrai. And Darkrai needs 3 energy attachments. Without Dark Patch, Darkrai is going to be a real pain to get going. But let's look at what's going to happen next season. Fighting's going to explode. I mean, Landorus, Muscle Band, Strong Energy, Fighting Stadium, 1-hit KOs a Darkrai for 1 energy on turn 1. Who wants to be playing Darkrai? Yveltal, on the other hand, has a resistance to fighting. So the fact that a lack of Dark Patch makes Darkrai less viable isn't a huge downside, because Darkrai is less viable due to its weakness. Now, I don't know how the format's going to shape out, but at least initially, fighting's going to be everywhere. Darkrai's not a good play. Anything fighting weak isn't a good play. And this is where something like Yveltal can shine. Because Yveltal has a fighting resistance. Now, Lucario's first attack doesn't care about weakness, it goes right through weakness. So we'll do the extra 20 to Yveltal, but everyone's so excited about Landorus, Lucario doesn't look as good because it doesn't do the 30 to the bench. So if Lucario's being played, it's kind of a moot point, but if Landorus is being played, they're doing 20 less damage. That's good. The other thing is, we've got non-EX Yveltal, which its attack is 30 damage plus a dark patch, and it has the same fighting resistance, and it's a single prize attacker. So I think we could see Yveltal remain being played, but the tactics might change to a kind of turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 non-EX Yveltal, basically trying to get the non-EX Yveltal going as fast as we can, try and get 2 or 3 hits, basically leave it up there till it dies, as long as that is, get an extra 2 or 3 energy attachments out of that, and then kind of have Yveltals ready to stream throughout the game, the EXs ready to stream throughout the game. Because let's not forget that the good counters to Yveltal will be Lightning. They are all, and I believe I'm right in saying, they are all weak to fighting, which makes them vulnerable to the fighting that's everywhere. So, let me try and get this nice and clear. Yveltal is resistant to fighting. That is in its favour. Not only is it resistant to fighting, but the counters to Yveltal are weak to fighting, meaning that people aren't going to want to play those counters because at least initially the format's going to be crawling with fighting. What that means is, you are likely to have a turn or two to use a non-EX Yveltal, to put, maybe 1 energy on each of 2 or 3 Yveltals on the bench, and then you can get attacking with them because you can just work with your manual attachments. Maybe you play Scramble Switch, maybe you play just a bunch of Energy Switch, so you can spread the energy out onto benched Yveltal EXs and then move it around with Energy Switch, and in that way Yveltal can be viable. Now you're losing a step. You are very much losing a step because you're not having Dark Patch. But what you're gaining is favourable type, both in terms of weakness and resistance, in theory, and you've still got the non-EX Yveltal to try and counter that. So it could work. The other big loss, and by the way, I'm not going to guarantee I'm going to go through every single little card which may or may not affect them. What I'm doing is looking at the most common builds of these decks and looking at the big changes. The other big change is Sableye. Now, if you go, and I've mentioned this a few times, but I really think you should watch it. If you go to my deck breakdown of Yveltal Garbodor, which I posted on my YouTube channel in the last couple of days, by the way, the first game I played with that deck will be up hopefully today, what you will find is that I talk about the Sableye. There were 2 Sableye in that list. Now, not every Yveltal deck has been playing Sableye. If you've been playing Yveltal without Sableye, don't worry your pretty little head about it. But a lot of people have been playing it. And Sableye is vulnerable. He's got 70 HP. As I've talked about the fighting Pokemon a lot, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to keep doing so, unless they don't see any play, which I really don't see happening, because they are relevant. But what we see is that 70 HP is going to be very easy to do very early. So Sableye isn't a lead with him every game kind of Pokemon. He's a situational kind of Pokemon. What you do is you use him, you will get him to reuse trainers. Now, one of the trainers you'd want to reuse, something like Dark Patch, which you can't do anyway. But there were things like Enhanced Hammer. Playing against Plasma, don't worry about that. We've got Enhanced Hammer, we can just knock this energy off all day long. Yay! But one thing to note here is that is Enhanced Hammer going to be as relevant? Now, I can still see the argument for playing a couple of Enhanced Hammer because they can take off things like Strong Energy. But Sableye in Enhanced Hammer was good because what you could do is reuse the Enhanced Hammer again and again and again and again and again to try and cripple the Plasma decks. And Plasma's going to be maybe the only other deck we talk about today. And one thing you will notice here is that Plasma should see a lot less play. Or the Plasma that does see play is more reliant on basic energy and less reliant on special energy. So my question basically is this. If these extra tactics like Enhanced Hammer to beat Plasma are less relevant, might Sableye also be less relevant and less missed? So, just to sum up with Yveltal Garbodor before we move on, or Yveltal Raichu, essentially you're losing Dark Patch, you're gaining type advantage, and Yveltal Non-EX may be able to slightly mitigate the loss of Dark Patch. Now, the other deck I want to talk about today, in terms of what changed since the rotation, is Plasma. We will be talking about the other decks like Virizion, Genesect and all that good stuff, but not this week. I don't think we're going to have time. But I do want to have a quick look at Plasma. Now, initially, Plasma, especially the TDK version of Plasma, was what I was really considering playing when we got our new format in August and the fighting decks were looking to dominate. Because I like the fact that you've got a Lucario counter in Deoxys, and you've got a water counter for things like Landorus, Landorus EX, Stunfisk, etc. in Kyurem. And then, of course, you've got things like Thundurus, who, yes, he's going to be somewhat vulnerable to the fighting Pokemon, but he's still good and he's still got his uses. And then you've got the whole versatility there. Things like the promo Landorus, which, to be fair, I did try playing and was incredibly underwhelming at the tournament I went to recently. But there's options all the way through. You've got Genesect, so if Seismitoad became really popular, you could be putting in things like multiple Genesects to cope with a Seismitoad. And the way Plasma was able to fit in all these different attackers was it had all the different types of energy. Now, initially, when Plasma came out, we had Prism, and then we had Blend Energy, because the Blend Energies had come in Dragon's Exalted. And it was slightly annoying, because the Blend Energy that worked with Kyurem and Thundurus was not the same one that worked with Deoxys and Genesect, but it was doable. And then we had the reprint of Rainbow Energy, and things were looking very nice indeed. Because between Rainbow and Prism Energy, we essentially had 8 energies that could work for anything. And then you could even add more Blend Energy as well if you wanted, although most people would put in a basic energy or two. But the problem is now we've lost Blend Energy. And we've lost Prism Energy. So that fantastic adaptability, which I've just talked about with the Plasma decks, is gone. We don't have that anymore. What we have is for Rainbow Energy, and then everything else you're going to have to work with basic energy. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this means you can't play a Plasma deck. All of the tricks that Plasma had, outside of the energies, came from generally Plasma cards. And all these were from Plasma Storm onwards, and all of these sets are still legal. So every single Plasma Pokemon remains in the format. They're all still in there. Not only that, but you've got your Colress Machine, Plasma Frigate if anybody wants to play that. Everything that you want with Plasma, all the Plasma cards, even down to things like your Hypnotoxic Laser and Verbank City Gym, which obviously aren't just for Plasma Pokemon. Everything like that is still in, but now you've got the rather large problem of the energy, and that's going to be the big thing holding you back. So let's say, for instance, Thundurus, like I kind of said with Yveltal, it's the opposite here. Thundurus is a big liability now because, as previously mentioned, there are now Pokemon that can do 180 on turn 1 for 1 energy to anything weak to fighting, which of course Thundurus is. And that makes Thundurus a little bit of a pain to try and use, but it's certainly far from the end of the world. It's still usable. So you can go there with Thundurus and he's going to be okay, he's going to work, he's going to be fine. But you need lightning energy for that. And then you're going to want Kyurem, and you really need Thundurus to recover energy, especially because not everyone's going to be playing fighting. Against non-fighting decks, it's still amazing early and late game to get extra energy on the field. But you need lightning energy to do that. And then you need water energy for Kyurem. And then now you're going to really want, because Kyurem's still the best attacker in Plasma. And then you're going to want some psychic energy so you can use Deoxys properly. And you see the problem already, hopefully, with where I'm going with this. You're not going to make a consistent Plasma deck running basic lightning, basic water, basic psychic, and, maybe basic grass for Genesect. It's just not happening. And this is the big problem. This is why, now, basic energy has always been better than your special energy, because it can be searched with energy search, switched with energy switch. it can, you could only get rid of it with Crushing Hammer, which is on a flip. If Plasma worked just as well with the basic energy as it did with the special, people would have been playing it with the special. With the basic, because the basic is just inherently better. The fact that people haven't been playing it with the basic means it's not as good with the basic. So your classic TDK, and this is the one which I think would be really good to try and cover all your bases, all your weaknesses, tech against this fighting deck, blah blah blah, at least in the way it was built and played, is gone. There's no kind of arguing about that. Although, of course, if you do want to argue, tweet me at the Warsy, email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, and we'll have a nice little argument about it. But as far as I'm concerned, it's very much cut and dry. That deck needed all the different types of special energy, and without them and just having the full rainbow, it's not going to be as good. Now, I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, saying that no one's going to get it working. There will be someone that makes a very good version of TDK with basic energy, and it's going to be consistent, but it can't have all the same tricks that TDK is used to having. It's just not possible given the cards that we've got. Now that's TDK Plasma. Let's not presume that that's the only version of Plasma around. In terms of the Lugia Plasma, we're fine. Lugia Plasma has still got all of the good stuff it used to have. All of the tricks that Lugia Plasma used to have, it had. Lugia Plasma never wanted the extra energy. You could run that quite simply with just basic lightning for Thunderous, or even maybe play a hybrid with Lugia and Kyurem with basic water. You've still got your Colress machine, you've still got your plasma energy, you've still got your double colourless energy. So I'm not saying Plasma is dead by a long shot, and I'm not saying Plasma won't see play by a long shot. But it's going to be things like the Kyurem and Caldeo deck that people were playing for a little while there. Or it's going to be the Lugia version of Plasma. Or it's going to be a new version of TDK with more basic energy and less tricks, less techs. Because, as sad as it is, we don't have the same Plasma deck we used to. Everything else is there. But the loss of Prism and Blend energy is going to put TDK and those kind of classic Plasma builds back to where they were, well, where they've never been. They've never had as poor a special energy as they've got now. So, that's Plasma. In a nutshell, you can't run Plasma like you used to with all the different attackers because you don't have the things. I mean, the biggest problem for me is, what I liked about TDK was if they went with something like Landorus, or something like that, something Water Weak, you had Kyurem, and you didn't really need a Thunderous there. And if they went with something like Lucario, you could go and get your Deoxys out. But the problem is now they're going to be playing Mewtwo, because with Lucario being weak to Psychic, that's going to mean that people are going to use Mewtwo to kill Lucario, so Lucario players are going to be playing their own Mewtwo. The fighting decks, and I'll talk about this far more in the upcoming weeks, but the fighting decks are likely to be played with Mewtwo and DCE, and the rest fighting. Now, what this is basically going to mean is that if you try going with Deoxys, your opponent is just going to need a Mewtwo DCE. Because the only energy you've actually got, assuming you're not playing basic Psychic, which is going to be very difficult, the only energy you've got to power up Deoxys with is Rainbow, which brings you down to 160, and if you've got 2 energy attached, then Mewtwo with DCE does 160 to you, so they don't even need the Muscle Band or Laser like they would usually need to get the KO back. They literally just need the Mewtwo DCE, which is a problem for you. Now, you only need the Plasma energy and Psychic energy. And the Plasma energy can be done with a Colress machine. And what you can actually do with Plasma, which is really nice against Mewtwo, is you can actually kind of line these up. Every time you get a Colress machine, pop it on a Deoxys on the bench. So that way, you can actually just need to draw into a Psychic energy every turn in order to get the KO. The problem is, you are likely to basically be playing just 4 of your Rainbow energy. And that's not going to be enough to consistently get the return KO on Mewtwo, and that is going to be a problem. So, that's essentially where we are. It's not an ideal situation by any stretch, but unfortunately, that's the reality of where we find ourselves. Plasma, still viable. I'm not saying it's not going to see play. I expect people to be playing it, especially because it's got so many tricks. But I think it's fair to say that the builds are going to have to change for Plasma. Because if we don't change the builds, we don't have the special energy to pull off Plasma like it used to be played. So that's Yveltal decks and Plasma decks. We will talk about every deck, and my aim is over the next... and it'll take me a fair few weeks, but over the next few weeks, my plan is to try and hit every deck. Every deck which is even vaguely viable in terms of a tournament scenario, I'm going to be trying to talk about over the next few weeks on the podcast and examine what's happened to it since the rotation and whether it's viable post-rotation. That, ladies and gentlemen, is my goal. So we started off with the first two today, and we will carry on with the rest of them in the near future. So, after having talked about the rotation in terms of what everyone else has been talking about, and in terms of Yveltal, Garbodor, and Landorus, what I want to finish off with today is what I've been calling my Pokemon love triangle. And I don't know why I call it a love triangle, because there's clearly no love involved, but it just kind of seems like a nice phrase. It's really Pokemon rock, paper, scissors. And the weird thing is, it kind of ignores Yveltal Garbodor. Now, for some reason, Yveltal Garbodor is not seeing the play it used to see. Now, whether this is because Plasma's taking it down, I don't know. More likely, something like... certainly the rise of Pyro has killed the non-Garbodor lists, but something's even killing the Garbodor lists. And what we've basically ended up with, moving into Worlds, is this weird triangle. And the three relevant decks, and it's been, for the longest time, it's been Plasma, Virizion, Genesect, Yveltal, Garbodor. Now it's turning into Big Basics, Plasma, Pyro. And the way it works quite simply is like this. Pyro just shuts down Plasma entirely. And Plasma basically can't keep up. It doesn't have good enough techs. And now I talked on the podcast a lot, and I wrote an article for 6prizes.com, including a couple of YouTube videos saying how Plasma can beat Pyro. They were unfortunately the old builds, and the old builds everyone was playing, I wasn't losing to Pyro with Plasma. I just wasn't. I was something like 8-0 at one point, or no, 8-1. There's one video on YouTube I lost. But the problem is, the new builds are basically just aggro Pyro, and they're built for speed with Tropical Beach and roller skates, and they've got a load of switches in to really mitigate the laser damage, and they don't really play or bench enough other Pokemon to get around the fact that I could, so what I used to be able to do was just catch and kill stuff off the bench. I can't do that anymore, and they're just very, very consistent. So Pyro really just shuts down Plasma. Not the old lists, not kind of Pyro Charizard, but these Pyro roller skates, and they're not much more than Pyro roller skates, are shutting down Plasma. And I might try and do a deck breakdown of this on the YouTube channel if I can in the near future. And that basically beats Plasma. But as we saw, and I believe you saw this on one of my YouTube videos, the first game I played with the US Nationals Big Basics winning deck, Big Basics with Garbodor just destroys Pyro. First of all, you're playing Raichu, which with a Muscle Band and a full bench one hits Pyro. Not only that, but as soon as you get the early pressure with stuff like Landorus, and as soon as you get the Garbodor out, you are completely destroying their Pyro with a Mewtwo or a Landorus or anything like that. Now, don't get me wrong, the Pyro player can try and capture the Garbodor off the bench and the Raichu and try and stop you before you get going. But if you set up, and this is, you saw the US, I hope you saw the US Nationals final, and at this point it's pretty much unequivocal. Big Basics with Garbodor tends to beat Pyro. It's even better against it than something like Yveltal Garbodor, and I think the reason for that is basically that there's kind of less setup. One Pokemon, one energy. Makes it easier. So, really, you've got Pyro, which completely shuts down Plasma, and then you've got Big Basics, which has a hugely favourable Pyro matchup, and then you end up with Plasma again. Because Plasma, especially the TDK Plasma, has an insanely good Big Basics matchup. Mewtwo falls to Deoxys, Landorus falls to Kyurem, the Raichu pretty much just can't do anything because the Thundurus is going to come out and kill it way too quickly. And then we're back to the beginning. And we're not just talking about favourable matchups. We're talking about kind of almost as close to auto wins as you can get. Pyro, unless one deck draws much better than the other, Pyro will beat Plasma. Big Basics will beat Pyro, and Plasma will beat Big Basics. And we end up with this weird kind of triangle where we don't really know what to do. And I'm going to talk probably next week. I'm going to give you my play for the Grinder, because there may well be people listening to the podcast who are going in the Grinder. I'm assuming most of the people playing in Worlds itself probably aren't taking deck advice from me this close to Worlds. Although hopefully they've been listening to the podcast and there's stuff that they've going to have been using. But essentially, next week we're going to look at plays for the Grinder, and the week after we're going to look at plays for Worlds. But when we look at the format before rotation and the way we are at the moment, building up to Worlds, this is basically where we stand. And it's a really odd one, because it really depends on what everyone else is going to be playing. If you play Pyro and come across a Big Basics Garbodor in the Grinder, you're probably going to lose. If you play Big Basics and come across a Plasma in the Grinder, you're probably going to lose. And if you play Plasma and come across a Pyro in the Grinder, you're probably going to lose. So the question comes down to what you actually play and how you build your deck. And we'll talk more about that next week. But what I wanted to just finish off with today was just having a nice chat about the fact that we've got this weird kind of situation at the moment, and we don't really know where we are. And it really depends on what other people are playing. And then the question, of course, comes, is there something that beats all of them? Now, Yveltal Garbodor may well beat Pyro, and I don't know if it will beat Plasma, but it certainly has a better matchup than just your regular Yveltal Raichu. But Big Basics has a very good matchup against Yveltal, because you've got the Raichu for the Yveltal, and you've got the Landorus for Darkrai and Raichu and all of that. So, and also you are really in that deck, you are really not hurt by your opponent getting a Garbodor out. So that's basically where we are in the format at the moment, and Yveltal's kind of become the fourth wheel, if you will. Because it's almost, I mean, you saw at US Nationals, by the time we got to top 32, and this was incredibly strange given everything we've seen for the last few months, but by the time we got to top 32, it was almost a kind of, almost an afterthought, like it wasn't really relevant anymore, which is very, very strange. Anyway, that, I believe, ladies and gentlemen, is going to do it for this week. We've had a big chat about everyone else's reaction to the rotation news, most notably about Landorus and my take on all of that. I've told you about Yveltal Garbodor and Plasma and how they are likely to fare post-rotation, and we've talked about the new rock, paper, scissors Pokemon in terms of the format at the moment. I'll be back next week where hopefully we'll finally have some new interviews if I can get them sorted out, and we may look at some more Pokemon decks and how they're going to fare after rotation, and we will have our little Grinder preview, and I will give you my pick for the Grinder. But I think for this week, ladies and gentlemen, enough is enough. I shall leave you to it. As always, if you disagree with anything I've said, if you want to make any comments or add to anything I've said, etc., etc., you can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or you can tweet me at the Wassy. Don't forget to check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/user/PTCG Radio, or just go on to YouTube and search PTCG Radio. You should find it without too much hassle. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.